just to kind of brief what we're going to talk about today, so that everybody kind of knows where we're at and where we're going to go. I'm going to break this, like I said at the very beginning, into two chunks. So at the very beginning, what I'm going to talk about is some really nitty-gritty technical information about how we've managed to increase online giving on our platform. And what we're really compelled by at CommitChange is both a dedication to transparency and education in the nonprofit space, and especially around transparency. But we think that the best way to build transparency in our industry is through education. And we take it seriously enough that we're not even, for instance, kind of hiding the secret sauce behind any of our successes or any of our technology. We're making everything very open sourced. So what I'm going to talk about is some of the kind of like exciting increases that we've seen in online giving. One of the most notable that we'll talk about at the very beginning is our initial case study when we first launched our technology about a year and a half ago. And we started working with 6 nonprofits in Washington State, and one of them in California. Each of these nonprofits, they were over $50,000 a year in annual revenue online. So they're raising pretty significant amounts of money online, good enough sample sizes anyway. And then each of those organizations, they remained stable for the full year that we worked with them during this beta period. So it means they didn't change any of their executive leadership, they didn't change their website, most of their appeals went out at the same time. So it's a nice controlled case study. And what we found at the end of the case study period was that we had increased online giving for those 6 organizations really dramatically. In fact, the person at the bottom, the lowest performer out of all of them, had increased online giving by 110%. So more than doubled online giving in a year. Everybody else was 150 to 175, with one outlier of 600%. So what I'm going to show you at the very beginning is exactly, detail by detail, how we managed to increase that online giving in some very nitty-gritty, very applicable ways, regardless of whether or not you use our technology or any other technology. Things that will help you increase online giving. And then the second part, like I said at the beginning, I'm going to focus a little bit more heavily on business models and some of the implications that different business models can have in our industry. And my objective there really is to bring transparency. And to be 100% transparent, I'm an activist in our industry. And I founded CommitChange as much to build a company. No, not even. I founded CommitChange 75% to change our industry, to bring more transparency to nonprofit technology, and to really dramatically increase online giving for nonprofits. So for me, it was really an activist sort of move. Like I don't care at all about the money, personally. So for me, the company is just a really great means to making great change in the world. And the second half of this presentation is going to be about that. So without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn off my screen here so you can focus entirely on the presentation. And we'll go ahead and get started. So I want to introduce you to my team really quick. I'm Roderick Campbell. I'm the co-founder of CommitChange. My other co-founder, the most brilliant person I've ever met, is Jay Bolton. Another really great guy who spent a year living in the woods in a cabin with no bathroom or kitchen because he likes to live off-grid and really cares more about physical or about tangible, real human impact in the world than anything else. A guy I really admire. And then Jason Nicosia, who runs our New Orleans office. He runs all of our operations and marketing down there. Really great guy. We're backed by some pretty interesting people. I'm just being 100% transparent. Our 2 major investors are Tim Draper and Mark Cuban. Tim Draper is from the family that founded basically Silicon Valley, the Draper family, from the Draper-Fisher network. They're really one of the largest VC firms in the world. And then Mark Cuban needs no further introduction. He's our other largest investor. One of the most valuable people on our team, though, is Chris Senton. He's my strategic advisor. He's a really great guy. He founded Network for Good and also NetAid in the early 2000s and was really one of the pioneers in online philanthropy and had some really great, I think, really ambitious, powerful visions for where technology could go. And unfortunately, he wasn't able to kind of achieve that mission, that kind of grand mission, for various kind of business and political reasons. But a lot of what we're trying to do, I just want to give him credit, is trying to kind of reinvigorate the work that he began back in 2000. So I want to give him credit for this work. So what we do, this is, I promise, the only salesy thing that I'm going to talk about, and I'm not going to be salesy at all, but I want you to know kind of what we do. CommitChange is an all-in-one fundraising platform, and our goal when we set out to build CommitChange was to have one website, CommitChange, where a nonprofit could run all of their online fundraising and then also, in the future, run their entire organization from one platform. And the goal was to take technology that was really antiquated and difficult to use and I think way too expensive in the nonprofit space and to make that technology really easy to use, really powerful, and dramatically change the business model so that we could make really high-quality technology affordable to all nonprofits. And then number two, we really wanted to change the business model so that technology in the nonprofit space was being sold, like in every other industry, essentially, as a subscription software model. So that it's flat fee, you know exactly what you're going to pay, everything's transparent. And that's really an activist piece for me. I think that transparency is really important. And then the last thing is donation skimming. So we really took a radical stand against what we're calling donation skimming. The price that you see right now, 2.2, is about to roll out. We're at 2.4 this month, but in June we're going to switch to 2.2. So what that means is that what we've been able to do is by not taking a percentage of donations, we're able to pass along bulk rate discounts to the nonprofits that use the fundraising platform that we built. And I hope that this becomes a model that other platforms adopt, because I think it's really powerful, because we're going to be able to get down by next year to 1.9% on our transactions, which is really industry low. And if we could roll out that sort of impact nationally, we would increase the fundraising efficiency of nonprofits online nationally by, say 1 or 2%, which across $20 or $30 billion really adds up to a lot of human impact. So that's it. No more spiel. Now I'm going to get into the tech and really try to give you some really technical stuff. This is what we're going to talk about. But here we go, part one. So donation processing is important. To think about donation processing is not just the donate button on your website. Donation processing really is anywhere where a transaction occurs between one of your supporters and your organization. And that could be through a donation through your donate button. It could be through purchasing tickets for one of your events. It could be by making a mobile donation. It could be by setting up a recurring gift. It could be by crowdfunding, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I would even argue that to some extent, some of the newer mobile auction sites are also in some ways a blend between e-commerce and donation processing. But for the sake of this conversation today, let's define donation processing as anywhere that a transaction occurs between a donor and a nonprofit. So what I want to talk about first is user experience. And this is unfortunately not something that we're traditionally very good at in the nonprofit world. But it has a huge impact on our bottom line. So user experience is a combination of design and user psychology, and then also really great development practices in software that at a high level make the software become sort of invisible. And a good way to think about this, the difference between good user experience or good UI and bad UI would be maybe the difference between what we think or what we remember Windows 98 being like versus what we experience when we use our smartphone today, our iPhone. It's not that the technology is doing anything fundamentally different between your old Windows 98 PC and your current iPhone. The difference really is 99% design. And it's about we've gotten better and better and better at figuring out how to present information to people in a way that's not overwhelming, in a way that sparks action. So I'm going to focus a lot here on the first half on user experience because it's a fairly lightweight, fairly non-technical way that most organizations can have kind of an immediate impact on their bottom line. So I'm going to introduce two case studies. We're going to talk about them a little bit as we go. They're two very, very different organizations. One of them is called Mercy House. They're down near LA, in Santa Clara. Or not Santa Clara, I can't remember, Santa Ana, down near LA. They're an older organization, just over 25 years, very typical social services organization, kind of providing the full gamut of social services, but mostly food and housing. Really awesome organization. And then Open Hands Overflowing Hearts is almost totally the opposite. So they were founded 90 days before they launched their first campaign with us. We were involved in the entire incorporation process for them. And they had no existing nonprofit infrastructure whatsoever when they started with us. So I'm going to walk you through kind of all of the things that led up to making both of these campaigns successful, and they were really radically different also in their outcomes and methodology. So hopefully this will apply to lots of people. High-level hypothesis. This is what you need to understand in order to make an immediate impact at your organization, is that your job as a fundraiser is to reduce the distance between your supporters and your nonprofit. That's it. At a very high level. And I'm going to show you why that's really powerful. But what you want to do is you want to think about how can I reduce the distance at all times between the supporters that I'm talking to and their ability to donate or volunteer or whatever the targeted action is. So take out as much of the air and as much of the fluff as possible and really get your supporters as close as possible to actions that have a positive impact for your organization. And I'm going to show you some ways to do that. But this hypothesis is very, very powerful. So number one is one-click donations. And this is something that we implemented right off the bat. It was one of our first hypotheses. So we learned a lot from the Obama campaign. The last Obama campaign raised $250 million through their website, which was unprecedented. It was a world record. And they did some really interesting A/B testing. So they did about 250 A/B tests, and from beginning to end, they managed to increase giving with a very large data set by 49%. So almost a 50% increase in online giving. And what they found is that it was really important to break down, and I'll show you this in detail a little bit, they needed to break down the donation process into clear steps, make it really easy, and then we elaborated on that. And we hypothesized that if you could make a donation anywhere from a nonprofit's website in one click, without reloading a page, and while keeping the content that's inspiring in the background, that it would have a big impact. And sure enough, it did. I would say that this is probably one of the 2 or 3 most impactful things that we did, was preventing the redirect when you click the donate button so that it doesn't reload the page to another page. And then also, from a psychological perspective, keeping the content that inspired the person to give in the background and visible. And it seems like a small thing, but it had a huge impact. So one-click donations. And what I would say is, if you're not using CommitChange, there are some other services that can provide one-click donations. Stripe is one of them. Stripe is actually who we use to process donations. They're a little bit more expensive, but not bad if you want to use them directly. I think it's 2.9. They're really easy to integrate. I'd recommend taking a look at them as well. And their form looks very, very similar to ours, so I would imagine it probably performs similarly as well. The next thing is multiple prompts. And this is a really big deal. So this harkens back to a phenomenon that relates to what's called decision paralysis. So decision paralysis is a really useful thing to know about. Decision paralysis is what occurs when you present somebody with too many decisions at once. And the rule of thumb typically is that it's 4 or 5 things. So never present anybody with more than 4 or 5 choices at a time. Otherwise, they tend to kind of freeze up like a deer in the headlights. And sometimes they will take longer to take an action, but often they won't take the action at all, and they'll go do something else. But on the flip side of this is where it gets really interesting. So that's decision paralysis. Too many decisions, I can't make a decision. On the flip side is a new phenomenon that I've been reading about recently that we've been testing very positively, and that is decision bias in some ways. And it's not actually decision bias, but it's a bias towards making a decision. And what that means is if you present somebody with option A, and option A is exactly what the person wants, or if you present them with option A, B, and C, and you know that they don't want B and C, interestingly, the person is significantly more likely to make a choice if you offer them multiple choices than if you offer them just the thing that they wanted. So provide lots of opportunities on your website for your supporters to donate in lots of different ways with different calls to action. And I would recommend testing those. And testing doesn't have to be a complex, kind of technically challenging sort of thing. Testing can be as easy as changing your donation process once you've got a hypothesis. Always start with a hypothesis. Never just see what works and what doesn't work. Here, what we did for Adhesia. Adhesia is an awesome organization. They provide food for really critically malnourished children in many countries around the world. And by critically malnourished, it's the children that are kind of in the last week of their life. And they specialize in bringing those children who are in the last week of their life back to health and back to the point where they can eat normal food again and survive. So they've saved 2.5 million children around the world, and we started working with them recently. This is my kind of current hypothesis that I'm working on with them. We've got a donate button on each page with a call to action using text. We also have a little button that follows you everywhere on the nonprofit's website on the bottom right. And then if you click through to ways to give on their website, you would see that there's an embedded form with an additional way to give, and then also a call to action asking donors to donate recurring. And I'm going to talk about why that's important in just a second. But one takeaway from this slide is have multiple giving options, present them in different ways, and try to give people choice, especially if that choice reinforces your mission. So it reinforces what the outcome is going to be. For instance, click here to make your donation. Children in crisis need you. It reinforces the need. That's really important. It's much more powerful than a donate button. Okay, here we go. So decision paralysis again. Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, I have one quick question just to stop you. Is the decision paralysis, just for my own knowledge, is that only typically for like donates, like if you have multiple donate, or can that be like any element in the web page? Should you not be like leading them into something completely different with the other links?
It's actually, that's a really good question. It's actually universal. It's not just with donation processing. It's not just with the internet. But if you present people, it's a well-known phenomenon. If you present them with multiple choices, they're more likely to make a decision. So that is a great point. And one organization that did a really good job of this last year was Charity Water. And Charity Water, when you first landed on their website, they would present you with 3 different stories. And each of the 3 different stories were designed to appeal to a different segment of their supporters. And then when you put through that story, it pulled you through a narrative that then culminated in asking the supporters to set up their own fundraising campaigns or to give specifically to something that would impact the narrative of that story. That was really massively effective. I've noticed they've done some sort of similar things since then, so I think it worked well for them probably. That's a really good point though, and I would encourage that. One thing that you want to think about in the future, kind of at a high level, this doesn't relate directly to this topic, but it's really important, is think about your website as an experience. And what you're doing is you should have multiple experiences on your website, know the people who land on your website, and then have an experience for each one that takes them kind of, from page A to page B to page C, or from idea 1 to idea 2 to idea 3 to donation or volunteer. Really think through those processes. Nonprofits traditionally, we've put up our websites, and then our websites, it's been sort of like a brochure online. In the future, and even today, that's just not cutting it anymore. So really think about making those interactive narrative experiences around your organization. That was a great point, Ben. Thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you.
So I think we've kind of beat around decision paralysis enough. You understand that. This is just another example of us, instead of linking to a form that has kind of lots of fields, we found it was very, very, very helpful to break down the form into 4 little chunks, and that it minimizes the amount of information that you're overwhelming somebody with at a time. And again, I would recommend implementing this both into your donation processing and fundraising campaigns, but also into any other call to action where you're trying to get a supporter to take a concrete, tangible action. Break it into small steps. Highlighting recurring. This is my favorite. I'm a huge fan of recurring giving for nonprofits because online, the bulk of the funds that you raise, really there's no excuse not to raise them as recurring funds. And it changes the entire, as a fundraising development staff person, it changes your entire interaction with that donor. Because rather than having to re-engage that donor, annually or biannually, you're stewarding the donor and you're building and maintaining a relationship. And it never gets awkward again. Because once somebody's giving $55 a month, say, all you're doing is you're showing them that the $55 a month is having tangible impact. You're keeping them kind of close to that impact. And it's much easier to steward and maintain recurring funds than it is to build new funds and re-engage individual donors. So highly recommend fostering and developing your recurring giving programs. This is how we tackled it. So this is pretty cool. I was really excited about this. Average recurring rates in the U.S., so recurring giving rates are about 2 to 3% of gifts end up being recurring for nonprofits, which is okay. But what we did was we had this hypothesis that if we highlighted recurring and we made it the default giving option, as you can see on the left-hand side over here where it says recurring and one time. So if we move that to the top and we fork the experience at the very, very beginning, we had a hypothesis that we would increase that number. And sure enough, it was dramatic. So like I said before, average recurring giving rates are 2 to 3%. On our platform, across all of our transactions right now, 12% of all of our gifts are recurring. So I think I would attribute most of that success in increasing recurring giving simply to forking the experience at the very beginning and making it very prominent. So regardless of whether or not you're using CommitChange or any other platform, it's usually easy. Make sure that your donation processor, one way or another, does accept recurring donations. That's the only thing that I would say concretely. You need to be able to accept recurring donations. But beyond that, the way that you're going to make your recurring giving programs really successful, or not successful, is it's going to depend on how much you highlight the recurring giving option, and then also, more importantly, on the right-hand side, you can see the more you can correlate giving to direct impact on a monthly basis. So think a lot about that. We've had a ton of success. If you have any questions, or if depending on what type of organization you are, if you're trying to figure out how to build a recurring giving program, regardless of whether or not you're a customer of CommitChange or will ever be a customer of CommitChange, feel free to tweet at us. Feel free to email myself or one of our staff, and we're happy to send some recommendations to you. Like I said, education is really important to us. Levels are really important, and correlating impact is really important. So if you're a donor, you're very unlikely unlikely to give, we found, if you just have a generic donate button, because then you have to make a lot of decisions. You have to figure out kind of what amount you're going to give, how much impact you think that's going to have. Oh, getting a little feedback here. Oh, there we go, I'm back. The donor has to make a lot of decisions if you have to generic donate form. They have to decide how much they're going to give, how much impact it's going to have, how meaningful that is to them. But what we found is that if you present some very clear giving options with giving levels, that alleviates a lot of that sort of paralysis. But it's really important that you correlate the amount the person's giving to a narrative or a story that they can relate to. So tie it to impact at your organization. $20 a month provides textbooks and critical supplies to adults and continuing education. $100 a month provides vital job training for clients working toward a more self-sufficient life. Those are very clear outcomes, very clear narratives, and as a result, those tend to be very successful, much more successful than a generic donate button. And then let's see, where's my next? Here we go. Designations and honorary gifts. I'm adding this in just because it was kind of a surprise to us. So when we first started, we had designations and dedications sort of towards the beginning of the form, right after the donors had entered their contact information. And then we had a hypothesis because we were looking at the data, and we realized that 95% of donors did not designate or dedicate. So it wasn't really impacting the majority of donors, but it was getting in the way of every donation because everybody who was making a donation then felt like either they had to fill in a designation or a dedication, or they kind of get stuck there, think about it for a while, and then we were seeing some drop-off where I think what was happening is people were thinking too long, maybe looking something else up, getting distracted, and never coming back. So what we did was we moved designations and dedications actually to the end of the transaction. So after the donor has entered all their contact information, the credit card information, after the actual donation has been processed, that's where we stuck designations and dedications. And I was shocked because we saw a 7% increase in online giving. And 7% across a larger data set is actually pretty significant. So even if you lost all 5% of the donors who were designating and dedicating by moving that to the end of the form, and we didn't lose them, but by moving it to the end of the form, we had this big 7% increase in total giving, which was much more significant than what the 5% is giving anyway. The other thing that we realized, and this is a good note for really any organization, I think, is that by de-emphasizing designations, we received fewer designations, and we received specifically fewer highly designated designations. So things like, I want my $35 to go towards, specifically books for a Hispanic child under 14 years old living in this community, which is a very difficult donation to deploy in the community. But what we found is that when we moved the designation to the end, it significantly reduced those arbitrary designations. And then the other thing that we found is that if you provide some broad category designated giving pools in your donate page or on your donate page, so for instance, here's our fund for children, here's our fund for families, here's our fund for education, et cetera, et cetera. What we found is that people who were not going to give are likely to give to one of those designated funds, but because they've pre-designated their gift in a broad way, you don't get very specific, very difficult designations. So I would encourage considering, especially if you're a larger organization doing larger volume, I would strongly consider setting up, even though it seems counterintuitive, at the bottom of your donate page, some giving pools, some designated giving funds that are very broad, because it's much better for you to have broadly designated funds than to have narrowly designated funds. And it's a nice way to kind of see another uptick in donations. This is really important too. So mobile. And to emphasize why mobile is so important, I have to point something out. We've reached the tipping point. In fact, we passed it, where now more than 50% of web traffic is mobile, which means that the majority now, or likely the majority of people who visit your website this year, and certainly in next year, year after that, a very clear majority of people are going to be using smartphones or tablets. And it's really, really important that you optimize that experience for those devices, because if they load your website and they can't use your website, or the website is difficult to read, especially for older supporters who really need to zoom in sometimes to read, it can become a really difficult experience. And the moment that your supporters encounter any difficulty like that, they tend to leave your website. So you really want to focus on that. If we're not mobile friendly, I would prioritize that above everything else, including using CommitChange. Really emphasize your website initially. And it doesn't need to be a clean, perfect, beautiful website. Just make sure that everything presents correctly on mobile devices. Otherwise, you could be losing a lot of traffic. So now the case study results. This is the fun part. Okay, so Mercy House, number one. We started working with them. They're one of those organizations in our initial case study, and they're actually the lowest performer. So I'm going to show you. They're 25 years old, $3.8 million annual revenue, and they started working with us. We implemented all of the techniques that I just showed you, all of the strategies at a high level for this organization. And this was the organization that more than doubled their online giving. Mercy House, incidentally, was the lowest performer out of all of those case studies. So I want to make it clear, like, I tend to be very conservative when presenting data because I don't want to misrepresent things. So Mercy House was our lowest performer. I wanted to pick one conservative, and they had more than doubled online giving. So these techniques really do work even for larger organizations. But I want to show you Open Hands Overflowing Hearts because I think that this might make more sense to some of the organizations here today. Open Hands Overflowing Hearts was founded by this gal that you can see in the middle, Kayla Perry in Alabama. She's amazing. She got into college, and in her first year in college, 18 years old, she was diagnosed with terminal brain cancer. And her family came together, and they asked, you know, what do you want to do with kind of your life? And they realized that they had about a year left, and Kayla decided that she wanted to found a nonprofit and raise money for pediatric cancer research. And they had no experience, you know, raising money before. Particularly, they didn't have an existing nonprofit. They had to found one very, very quickly. So we helped them kind of expedite that process by donating a lot of our technology to them and some of our expertise. They got everything online, and they launched this campaign called 100 Days, 100 Ways. And their goal, it was brilliant. I highly recommend looking it up just so you can see kind of this template. But they created this campaign, and the goal was to encourage people to come up with 100 different ways to raise money over the course of 100 days for childhood cancer research. And they launched this campaign on Twitter. We helped them implement best practices around like gathering supporters and champions to promote the campaign. And their goal was really ambitious. It was to raise $10,000 in 100 days with no existing donor network. So that's pretty challenging, especially for an organization that's only 3 months old and has very little experience, has no donor email list, no mail list. So they launched this campaign, and they raised not $10,000. In fact, they raised $412,000 in 100 days. So I don't know what percentage that is, but it's a huge percentage over their goal. And we didn't throw anything special behind this campaign. They did all of the hard work, and they did work really hard. But it represented this possibility that crowdfunding, when you can put together a narrative on a platform where the technology can be kind of invisible because it's all taken care of, really magical things can happen when you can focus entirely on that human story. And that's what happened with Open Hands Overflowing Hearts. And I think a big reason, aside from having this stunning young woman, Kayla Perry, running the campaign, I think the other thing they had was this catalyst story, and then also a really powerful knack for telling that story. And that's what made this campaign work. So I recommend looking it up. Go to Open Hands Overflowing Hearts on Google, or look up hashtag 100 Ways, 100 Days. I'll chat it right now. As a really good template, and it doesn't matter again if you're using us or Indiegogo or Kickstarter or whoever. What they did was really inspiring, and it works, I think, as a really powerful template for a lot of organizations. So check that out. Now I'm going to get into the meaty part, and this is where I'm going to get a little bit controversial, a little bit activist, because this is one of the things that I feel most strongly about, and one of the big reasons that I founded CommitChange, is to bring transparency kind of around fees and business models in nonprofit tech. So first of all, let's just look at what processing costs look like. I just grabbed kind of a random spread, and the reason I use CommitChange to be 100% transparent is because we're the only platform that I know of at the moment that doesn't take any percentage of donations. So it allows you to kind of see how the model breaks out. But I think there's at least one other organization, a competitor of ours, called FlipCause. I'll chat them in the chat box right now so you can take a look. I don't think they're taking any percentage of donations. I think there's one other small platform run by a college student that's not taking percentages. But we're in the minority. We're in the vast minority, unfortunately, not engaging in donation skimming. So here's how it all breaks down. Razoo, Classy, CrowdRise, First Giving, CommitChange. The first fee that you see at the top is the platform fee. And for the sake of understanding what a platform fee is, let's just call it what it is. It's donation skimming. It's taking a percentage of donations in exchange for using the platform. So it's skimming a percentage of donations. Platform fee seems kind of ambiguous. Second is the actual donation processing cost that's listed for the organization. This is the credit card fee. So all of us, as platforms that provide these services to nonprofits, we all use credit card processors. We use processors like Stripe, like Balance Payments, Braintree, Authorize.net, and kind of a myriad of others. But those are the big ones. And this is, you can see there's actually some inconsistency. So they go from 2% all the way up to 2.9%. These fees can go as low as 1.9%, which is what we're working towards at CommitChange. We should achieve that volume by the end of this year, by January 1st of next year. So hopefully we'll get it down to 1.9. It looks like Razoo is also working close to 1.9, which is really cool. And it looks like Classy, they're definitely at 2.2. They would be at or below that. But there is something kind of hidden here, and that's that CrowdRise and First Giving. I can't talk specifically about CrowdRise, but First Giving has been around for a long time. They're listing 2.9%, but I am absolutely 100% certain that they do not pay 2.9% because we pay 2.2 and we have significantly less volume than them. So I'm not sure what's happening to that other, say, 0.5 to 0.7%, but it's not part of the credit card processing fees because we cover everything with 2.2. So I know those fees pretty intimately. The third tier, or the third row here, is the subscription fee. And this is how much the platform costs per month. So ours is sliding scale from free to 300. Most of them end up being kind of in the $50 to sort of $100, $150 a month range. Network for Good, I think, right now is sort of $79 to $150, $175 range, which is very similar to CommitChange. And Razoo doesn't charge anything, but they take a slightly larger percentage than some platforms. First Giving, you can see they charge a very low fee. Actually, it's $500 per year, which looks very attractive. But they take 5%, and I'll talk about kind of like how all this works out, so you can see whether or not any of these platforms are a good fit for your organization and why. That's the important part. So here's the next slide. Oops. So let's go ahead and blend. Just to make the math a little bit easier, we're going to combine credit card processing plus the platform fee, or the donation skimming amount. So we've got 6.9, and you'll see a trend now all of a sudden. And if you do your own math, look at all of these different platforms, you'll find that 6.9 is a very, very, very common number. It tends to blend out to about 6.9 for most organizations. Classy's lower, but they do charge a pretty high subscription fee. It's worth noting that Classy also has different percentages. I want to be totally like 100% correct about all of this. So go to their website, take a look, but they charge different percentages based on how much of a monthly fee. And I think it ranges from 3% to 1%, but confirm that, please. So here's the blended rate. And then here's what it costs you per year just for the subscription fee. So I just want to make the math super, super easy. These are the numbers that you need to see in order to know what it's going to cost your organization to use any different platform. So let's go ahead and use a case study. Let's go back to Open Hands, Overflowing Hearts. Let's say that you're like them. You run a successful crowdfunding campaign, and you process $400,000. Or you're a larger organization and you're processing significant volume online. Or you can scale down these numbers to see what it'll cost your organization specifically, which I'd recommend doing. Here's what it ends up costing at the end of the day. It's really significant. So Open Hands, Overflowing Hearts, had they use a platform that engages in donation skimming, it would have cost them an additional almost $20,000 to run that campaign. To put that into perspective, and the reason that I'm an activist, to run that campaign from our perspective as the platform, all of the campaign, the $412,000, including all the extra service that we provided them, really rolling out the red carpet, throwing our network behind some of their work, all of that cost us probably at the most $400. So in terms of margin for a platform running one of these campaigns, and in terms of processing donations and providing donation processing services, the margins, even with just the subscription fee, even without any donation skimming, the profit margins are like 95 to 98% profit for us as technology providers. And that's without engaging in donation skimming. So donation skimming really is on top of that subscription fee because our fees, the cost for us is flat. And in my opinion, the pricing should reflect that and should very clearly reflect some of the actual costs to the organization. So take a look at that. Hopefully that's sort of outraging. But I want to step back a little bit and show you why I take this on as my big kind of activist piece, and that's because of communities. So here we go. Let's see what Silicon Valley gives raises. They raise about $8 million a year online for their annual giving day. They use Razoo, which is very common. Razoo is one of the only providers. I think Kimbia now is providing some giving day software, but I believe it's just Razoo and Kimbia. So it's a very limited market. They can kind of charge whatever they want. They're charging 6.9%. So what did it cost my community here in Silicon Valley on that one day where they raised $8 million per year on one day? Ends up costing our community about $552,000 to use that software. So $500,000, which in my opinion is outrageous. Without using donation skimming, paying for that software, just paying for the software as a subscription, that would drop down to about $200,000, so less than half of the cost. Which I think is still more expensive than it should be, because credit card processing should be lower for nonprofits, but I'll get to that someday. Give Them In. This is a really big one. So since 2009, Give Them In has raised over $100 million. Up until this year, again, they use Razoo, 6.9%. And I'm really not beating up on Razoo. I think they're a great organization. Well, I have some problems with their business model, but I think they're a great organization. But the only reason I'm bringing up Razoo twice is because they really were, for the last few years, the only people doing this. So hopefully that will change. A little bit of competition will help the market. So 6.9%, $100 million, you can do the math. Every year, or it has cost over the course of, since 2009, $6.9 million to use that software. Is that software worth $6.97 million? No. In fact, we built all of CommitChange that you can see today, which is at this point one of the most comprehensive fundraising platforms online in terms of feature set. We built all of that for about $400,000. That's our actual cost. So $6.9 million is a lot of money for technology that's not very expensive for us to produce. But nationally, let's zoom out and let's see what this impact is in terms of human scale. And this is where I'm going to leave you. But I want to drive this point home. U.S. online giving right now is about $20 billion annually. That number is growing really quickly. So it's not going to be $20 billion for long. The total of individual giving in the U.S., offline and online, just from individuals, is about $217 to $220 billion per year. So online giving in the U.S. represents about 10% of total giving in the United States. But that number is growing year over year at an explosive rate. I mean, we've reached a point where my grandmother, uses an iPhone and she chats with me on Facebook. That means that she is perfectly capable of giving online. And it's probably easier for her to give online, even as my grandma, than it is for her to find her checkbook and figure out where her stamps are. So we're going to see a massive explosion in online giving. Right now it's $20 billion a year. So let's lower the percentage. Let's assume not everybody is charging what Razoo is, and let's reduce the total skimming cost to 4%. If we process $20 billion per year online in the U.S. just today, this is not accounting for any growth, it's going to end up costing us $800 million per year, which is a really big number for this software, and I think a totally unreasonable number for the technology that we're providing as technology players. But let's look at the future of giving, and let's say very conservatively, and I think this is absurdly conservative, that $100 million, or roughly half of online or total individual giving, will occur online by 2025. So just to make sure that's really clear, that's 50% approximately of all giving from individuals will occur online or via a device by 2025. I think more realistically it's going to happen in 5 years, but let's say it takes billion meals per year to people in our communities who need those meals. And that doesn't solve the hunger problem in the United States, but it does take a really, really, really big chunk out of it. And that gives you some sense of scale. And that's why I think it's massively important that we bring more transparency to business models in the technology industry for nonprofits, and that we align those business models with the success of nonprofits long-term in a way that will scale up to what will eventually become a $100 billion market every year, in a way that provides equal value and also, most importantly, achieves the impact that we're all trying to achieve, which is positively impacting lives. And I think we can get there. So that's where I'll leave you, and let's branch out to questions and have a conversation.
So at this present moment, we don't have questions, but if people do have questions, again, post it in the questions pane, but I'll ask a few right now, and specifically one because we did have a question that had come into into Grassroots' email that kind of had questions about business model and the ethics of it. So I'm not going to wade too much into the debate about skimming, and I probably won't use that term because it's not Grassroots' place. What I love about Roderick is the passion that he's bringing in trying to change a business model that he sees. But the first kind of question, and I love having skepticism or whatever, is when, Roderick, and I think we had this conversation right off the bat when we were first partnering. When is it appropriate for an organization to use a platform that takes a percentage? Because I think at a certain point, in the maturity or the level of donations, it might be advantageous. So, do you see at any points that a nonprofit should be considering something like a Classy or a CrowdRise as opposed to you guys? And of course, I love where you guys are going, and if you're lowering that percentage, but when does it make sense for an organization?
Yeah, and that's really why what I wanted to do today is provide some of the math and expose the working parts rather than just advocate strictly against it. I'm 100% against it at this point. My opinion, after really digging into it and being involved in our industry and kind of hearing the inside conversations going on, I'm adamantly opposed to it. But I think that it's really important that people arrive at their own conclusions, regardless of what those conclusions are. So hopefully today what happened was we revealed kind of all the moving parts, and now everybody can go back to their own organization and kind of assess the cost and the value. It does make sense. Donation skimming can make sense mathematically for organizations that raise smaller numbers of dollars online, like you were implying, and that's absolutely true. If you're an organization that's processing, say $1,000 per year online, it really doesn't matter what tool you're using, unless you're going to significantly increase or plan on increasing that online giving. The one thing that I will say, though, is that going forward, it's not going to be, we could make a mistake by running the math today. Because donation skimming really isn't, it's not breaking anything today. I mean, our whole market online for online giving is only $20 billion. So it's only 10% of the total giving market in the U.S. What I'm concerned about is that that's not always going to be the case. And I think in 5 to 10 years, it's dramatically not going to be the case. I think what's going to happen in 5 to 10 years is we're going to see the majority, if not even the vast majority, in my opinion, of giving shift, believe it or not, from people who have always written checks to people who are now more comfortable or comfortable enough going online, going to a website, pulling out their credit card and making a donation. That's already happening. Organizations are already seeing it in mass. In fact, we already have organizations that are raising over 51% of all of their money online at this point. And they're not unusual, weird, millennial organizations. They're food banks. So I think number one is understanding kind of like what I'm advocating for in terms of time frame and timeline. And then number two, understanding how the math works, run the math on your own organization. And then number three, the thing that I would advocate for as an alternative, and I'm going to put my money where my mouth is here this year. I can't announce anything yet. But I think it's important for technology providers to provide really comprehensive tool sets for nonprofits that are really, really, really cheap and don't take a percentage of donations. And what I mean by that is, for instance, providing a comprehensive fundraising package for nonprofits that does not take a percentage of donations and costs $10 to $20 per month, but provides all the tools they need in order to get off the ground and start raising money online, processing donations. There are alternative models. We don't have to have sort of this binary black and white option where it's either donation skimming at 6% or no donation skimming. We can meet in the middle, and we don't have to either have tools that are expensive monthly or expensive in percentages. I think that there's also some room in our market for low-cost or even free high-quality donation processing tools for nonprofits, especially as the market sort of begins to align more with the positive outcomes for nonprofits rather than just kind of the immediate bottom line for the company. But the takeaway I would say is for each organization, for the 18 people sitting here right now, hopefully what happened is I sparked an idea, and that idea may not be relevant or important for all of you. But run back and run the numbers and see if it is, because for the ones of you who it is important for, it could have a huge human impact, reducing those fees. And then I think the other thing that I'm doing is I want to start a conversation, because I'm not exclusively saying that I'm right either. I believe I am on the right side of the fence here, but I think that what needs to happen is there should be a conversation. And I want to thank you, Ben, and also thank Grassroots for letting us kind of push a little bit and not necessarily supporting a radical idea, but giving us a forum where we can have that conversation and move the industry forward. And regardless of how this turns out, I think what's exciting is that we're having these conversations, and innovation is beginning to occur in nonprofit technology, and nonprofits are becoming kind of more familiar and more evangelical about the technology that they use. And I think that's the outcome that we can all agree that we want.
So we actually have a person who had asked the question through email. I just got an alert from our colleague who was asking about specific numbers. I'll unmute you. It's Heidi Hill-Drum. I'll unmute you if you don't have a microphone or you actually don't want to speak. I can read off the question, but I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. Give me 1 second.
And I just made public copies available at any time through this URL. So feel free to if you want to fact check or check numbers.
Hi, Heidi, are you there?
I am. Thanks so much, but I don't remember the question that I submitted.
Do you want me to? I'll read it off, and if you have more to put it to into it, I'll go into it.
Thanks. Yeah, just so everybody knows, we're a super small nonprofit. I'm a part-time executive director. We have one grant-funded employee. We're just, getting going in the last year or so. So we're looking at all these different platforms and trying to decide what makes sense, considering how small we are. So I think my question was related to that because we've looked at a variety of options and haven't settled on any.
Sure.
What are your, just so I can give good advice, what are your numbers? Like, how much do you raise online right now?
Less than 100 a month, and we are an organization with a budget well under $100,000 a year.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. That really helps.
Okay.
And Ben, do you want to read the question?
Sure, and it has a lot of that. So the question is, we are a new nonprofit organization, as you said. What's your organization, by the way?
The Tahoe Prosperity Center, and our goal is regional prosperity, so the community, the economy, and the environment here in Lake Tahoe.
Wonderful. Awesome. Working to build a sustainable funding base as we grow. We're considering using an online partner since, as a part-time executive director, I'm spending more time on fundraising than on programs currently. Given how small we are, 1.5 staff, the budget under $100,000 per year, is this a good investment, or should we wait until we have a larger budget, more staff, etc.? The platform we are considering charges $6,000 per year and takes 2%.
Oh, okay, $6,000 per year.
It was classy.
Oh yeah.
But you already called them out.
Yeah. No, I wouldn't use Classy if I were you. I was debating whether or not I would even use CommitChange, honestly. You might even want to just use a generic PayPal button for a while. I hate to recommend that, but
no, that's what we have now.
Okay, that's what we have now. Okay. Yeah, honestly, I would stick with that for.
Uh-oh, I can't hear
Yeah,
you.
you cut out for a few seconds, Rod. If you can repeat.
Is real money online. They've got all the infrastructure in place, and then the donation skimming percentages. The percentages start to make a difference over $3,000. So at that point, it would make sense to use a fundraising tool. I would not. I really want to remain as neutral as possible. I don't recommend just using us. I recommend checking out as many different platforms as possible and doing a comparison. But in terms of price, I would not use a more expensive tool. I don't think it's going to move the needle until you've got your organization more established and you have more of your offline funds kind of locked down and the organization's in a safer place. But that would be my opinion. I would just hold off for now.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
And again, people don't have to have necessarily questions about donation skimming. I know it was the last particular in the presentation, but should you have any questions about other things that Roderick described here, or if it's not related to the presentation, that's certainly fine. We want to take any questions. So if they are there, just again, post them in the questions pane. I got 2 for you, and if we have any more, we can take them.
Sure.
But So you were talking early on about recurring donors, and you had said that I think you were about at 12% as opposed to, I think you said 2% usually, yeah, is the average. Do you have any information? And then also, I assume because you've put the recurring donor button out on front, is there any drop-off rate after like a certain set of months that a reoccurring donor has chosen that option? And then on what are like some elements that organizations who have stayed very consistent with their reoccurring donors past just your technology, how they've as you said steward them?
Yep. It varies wildly, drop-off rate, and we call it churn rate, so the rate that your recurring donors churn out. And the churn rate really varies according to the organization's development staff, their mission, and how often they communicate with those supporters. The biggest differentiating factor is pretty logical. It's the lowest drop-off rates are the organizations that communicate most regularly with those supporters, reporting on outcomes. So if I'm donating $50 a month, I don't mind you emailing me every single month, telling me about the outcome, how you're putting my funds to work. And preferably you've segmented your recurring donors into some broad categories. You've got major recurring donors who are over $100 per month, middle tier recurring donors, which for us our average recurring gift is about $50. So that would be about middle tier, and then your low end recurring donors who would be anything under say $35 per month. And then communicating equivalent impact to each of those groups. So that everybody in pool A is donated between $100 and $200 per month. You know what that impact is approximately per month. Report on it. But by keeping those people engaged with your organization, you can do two things. One, you can reduce their churn rate significantly, and we have some organizations that have almost no churn rate so far. So you can almost eliminate it. Number two is, and this is really important, it's a good opportunity to get those recurring donors to take additional actions. Now that you don't need to ask them for money, you can start to ask them for social capital. So for all of your recurring donors, if somebody's giving, say, $35 a month, in the email where you report every month on the outcome, how you're deploying those funds, send them also some options for ways that they can amplify the impact of their donation of work. And that's sharing a certain story on Facebook and Twitter, emailing 5 of their friends with a specific message. Don't be afraid to kind of pull out those additional asks. And what you'll find is that recurring donors are just, once you've got a large enough recurring giving program, it changes your entire game. It really amplifies in on itself and changes a lot of the way that you think about your organization, and then also really dramatically changes the sustainability of your organization because now you've got predictable revenue. So I really strongly recommend it, and the best way to keep those people on board is to communicate regularly and show them that what they're doing is working.
Great. So we'll switch from my questions to members' questions. We have 2 more. This is from Molly Thompson. Molly, can you hear us?
Yes.
Hi, Molly.
Yep. Hi, can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
I was just wondering, I noticed your site had discounts for nonprofits for the use of CommitChange. I was wondering what those discounts were.
Yeah, sure. We provide discounts to smaller nonprofits. We really don't want our platform to be inaccessible to anybody, but we don't want our pricing to be unclear either. So the way that we handle it is any organization with annual revenues under $500,000 automatically receives a discount, and I think it's almost 50%. And then organizations that are over $500,000 but kind of under the $2 million range, it depends on the organization. But for some organizations, just because they have a $2 million annual budget doesn't necessarily mean that they're raising significant money online or that they have resources, and we understand that. So we kind of talk to each individual organization, and then if we find that our pricing model doesn't work for them, we try to find a way that does not exclude them. But the biggest way we do that is through discounts, and we're pretty liberal about our discounts. We don't want anybody excluded.
Great. Appreciate it. I'm one of those small organizations. So.
There's tons of them, and we all start as small organizations. So it's important to have good technology backing you so you can grow, in my opinion.
Thanks.
Yep.
And then the second question, let me find, is Chris Wright. Chris, are you there? Chris does not have a recording or a microphone, so I'll read his question for him.
Excellent.
He asks, is there a suggested minimum budget for a nonprofit to have before utilizing a system like yours?
Yeah, I would suggest your minimum, and not budget, the way that I would think about it is the amount of money that you're raising, and specifically the amount of money that you've raised online, unless you don't have any track record at all, in which case it's useless. But if you've been raising money, when your organization reaches a point where you're raising per year over $2,000 to $3,000, that's when I would like you to come talk to us. If you're raising under $2,000 to $3,000, it's probably better to hold off and focus on grassroots organizing and raising money kind of the old school way. But when you've reached that certain point where you're raising, real money online, that's a good point to kind of upgrade your technology, because you may have reached an inflection point where upgrading that tech may double that number, and in which case you're netting positive no matter what. So the importance here is, as a development director or as a nonprofit leader, is dig into your numbers, run some different scenarios through the different models that I've presented here, and sort of see where where the points are when, if we raise, say, over $5,000, you may find that these platforms that look like they were less expensive are actually more expensive, for instance. So really make sure that you kind of know what those numbers are going to look like, run the numbers, and then take a look at the net, even if the growth seems a little bit weird. So that's really important. But generally, I would say $3,000 is safe. If your organization raises more than $3,000 a year online, we've had a big success almost every single time. If they raise less than that online, typically they're too small, and they just end up kind of defaulting back to our free version, which is great. We want people using our free version in order to build themselves up. But that tends to be the cutoff.
So I have one more question. If there's nothing else after that, we've appreciated everybody's time. But sure. Before that, one of my staff just wanted me to mention that this is being recorded, so the entire presentation is there, all by a minute of the intro. So that'll go up onto youtube.com. /grassroots.org, and grassroots.org is spelled out phonetically, so the full thing is spelled out. You'll also find the 7 other office hours that we've had previously on there, and the topics range from more on UX to being more strategic with your email marketing for your fundraising. So there's a whole host of different topics if you're interested in checking those out. My last question for you, Roderick, is about all of the hypotheses that you were talking about early on, and they're numerous. So how do you go about testing out these hypotheses? And I'm kind of looking from a technological standpoint, and how might you advise to do it if you don't want to spend money in terms of technology for tools out there? What's a pretty cost-effective way?
Oh man, I love testing. And testing is scary for nonprofits, but it shouldn't be. There are some really great tools that take a lot of the guesswork and the pain out of it. Number one, make sure that on your website you've got Google Analytics installed. I'm going to type that into the chat just so that everybody that isn't familiar with it can search it. But Google Analytics, number one. Even if you're not going to start analyzing any of that data or doing any tests or testing, or experimenting, get Google Analytics on your site immediately, because then you'll have a baseline, and then 3 months from now, 6 months from now, 2 years from now, when you go to test a hypothesis, you'll have a large baseline data sample. And that's really important, because otherwise you won't know if you're above or below anything. You're also going to, in Google Analytics, although it's really easy to install, provides tons and tons of data. You can use it just to check kind of your traffic, but then in the future it'll scale up so that as you work with a larger technology provider, they can dig into lots of granular data retroactively. I love it. It's a great tool. The other one that I recommend, if you're a medium-sized maybe organization, is a tool called Optimizely. I love Optimizely. We use it at CommitChange religiously. And Optimizely is what's called an A/B testing platform. And an A/B test is just where you come up with a hypothesis. Say, I think this button will perform better if it's green than if it's red. We change the color of the button, and then we run a red button and a green button across, say, 10,000 donors on each side. And then Optimizely tells us exactly how that change made an impact on donor behavior. So Optimizely can be really cool. The thing that Optimizely is useful for nonprofits would be, for instance, on your homepage presenting 2 or 3 different stories and then tracking, if you present the story in a different way or in a different kind of visual format, how does that impact your conversion rates and the way that your supporters interact with that content? That's a really, really good tool. The last one that I would say is really important, often overlooked, is email reporting. So you really want to know what your click-through rate is. Most of your funds are going to come from email. So 95% of all your online donations are going to occur because somebody received an email from you. They clicked through that link, and they were inspired enough by what they saw to make a donation. So you really need to get good at email marketing to raise money online. And to reach millennials especially in the future, you're really going to have to be sophisticated at email. So it's a good time to start right now. It's a nice time to get into it. And what you want to do is you want to look at different types of content with different amounts of imagery versus text, laid out in different ways, result in what type of click-through. And the real trick here, every nonprofit will look at their click-through rate, their open rate, and their unsubscribe rate. That's not really what's important. You're getting the cart before the horse if you do it that way. What you want to do is start, like I said, with a hypothesis. So we think that if we do this, this will happen. And then figure out what numbers would demonstrate whether or not that will succeed, and then take a look at those. But every email client, MailChimp, Constant Contacts, they all provide analytics based around that. And I would say that those are really the biggest things. Google Analytics, Optimizely, and then whatever analytics you can pull out of your email campaigns. And the way that you run an A/B test is you start with a hypothesis, come up with the metrics that are going to tell you whether or not the hypothesis was true or false, and then you test it. Nothing really sophisticated, but A/B testing is immensely powerful, as you can see from what we've been able to achieve in a fairly short amount of time.
I will do my one cheap plug. So MailChimp has MailChimp's great if you have a small subscriber list of under 2,000. It's free. But my one cheap plug is Grassroots does offer a 50% discount to SendGrid, which is another very good email marketing tool out there. So if you got something above that, you might want to check them out. They'll do all of that as well. So that's my one for this conversation.
No, SendGrid's great.
Yeah.
And so is MailChimp, and you nailed it. It comes down to whether you're kind of over or under 2,000, honestly.
Yep. And that's and it comes in the last minute. So I wanted to say thank you to you, Roderick, again for hosting and presenting with me. And then again to all of the people who were here and participating. It's again another elation I feel on myself to or whatever the word might be for this. So thank you, and I hope everybody enjoyed it.
Ben, thank you for hosting this forum. It's such a pleasure to join Grassroots and continue the great work.
All right, take care, everyone.
Bye.